Final confession. The statement that follows is true and has been written by me, Randall Grant Hollifield Jr., on July 6th, 2014. I wanted her to know that I wasn't the same man that she married. It took me 33 years to finally understand exactly what my father had been telling me. Oh, I got up close and personal. I could feel her breath on my face. I could taste the fear in her eyes. My father always told me that a man was capable of great things when his asshole was plunged against a wall. It was in that moment that I could wrap my brain around what the illustrious Lieutenant Colonel Randall Grant Hollifield was preaching to me. He used to say, "When it's time to shit or get off the pot, be sure to fill it all the way up." I wrapped my right hand around her throat. I drove the knife all the way in under her ribs. I drove it upward, the way that my daddy taught me when I was old enough to carry a knife. I know that I punctured a lung on that first lunge. I could hear that wheezing sound that meant she was breathing blood and a little bit of air. I pulled the knife out and eased it back in a few inches, just above the first wound. It was obvious to me that she was going to die in the next minute or two. I could have just let her stagger around and grasp for air while she bled out. But the time watching someone die could be used to prepare for some type of subversive activity that might require attention. So I just pulled the knife out and released her throat. She had that empty look in her eyes that some deer must have when they know that the dear grim reaper's knocking on the door. Before she could gather enough energy to stagger to the door, I shoved the knife in on the right side over her fifth rib. It punctured her lung, probably cut a main blood supply or two. It took her about a minute to stop breathing. I knew that eventually you guys had put two and two together and named me as a person of interest. I just decided to beat you all to the punch. I buried them in a secret place. Went back to my house and had a nice cold beer and then drove right over here to turn myself in. Oh, I know that you're wondering where it is. But before I lead you to the location, I'll need a favor from the fine men and women of the Foote County Sheriff's Department. I'd like to spend 15 minutes talking to my father and my sister at our family plot, alone. Your armed deputies can surround me, but no closer than 50 feet. Some of the things I'd like to discuss with my father and my sister are private, family matters that could affect your lasting opinion of my father and our family. And it's not my goal to desecrate the way the community remembers him. I have some things that I'd like to tell him. I'd like to let him know that I am the man I am today because of him. I want him to know my daddy didn't raise me to become some crazy killer man. I have to take responsibility for that myself. And by the way, you wouldn't have figured any of this out until tomorrow. You probably noticed that earlier in this confession I used the word them. Kaylin's lover, Neil, he's dead too. I killed him about an hour before I went home and gave her throat a goodbye hug. The last time that I saw him, he had a neat little hole going on in the front of his head and a big mass of flesh and blood and brains coming out of the back. I can promise you that if you go to his house right now, you'll find red and grayish globs of his medulla oblongata splattered all over his living room wall. Now, I'm sure that some of you think that I'm a pussy for shooting Neil and not running the knife through him a few times. But let's be honest, he was 6'3" tall. He weighed at least 260 pounds. He was a big old ham-fed boy. I would have probably been killed myself if I'd approached him with a knife. If you choose not to give me this request, I can promise you that you guys will waste man-hours and taxpayer dollars trying to find their bodies. And by the time that you do get close, coyotes and other wildlife will have pulled them out of their shallow, loose grave and enjoyed a lovely 2-course cadaver meal. I hope that you'll grant me this one request, and I'll waive my rights to any future favors. This statement was written without coercion or threats at the Foote County Sheriff's Department. Sincerely, Randall Grant Hollifield, Jr. Randall took a sip from his coffee and leaned back in the shiny hard-bottomed silver chair. Are you done? Why, yes, I am. Randall pushed his cup across the table. You smart-ass little shit. I meant, will you? Buck, I knew what you meant. You never were too bright, were you? That's probably why you started taking all those muscle enhancers in high school. You'd gain mass below to make up for that gray matter missing up top. Randall tapped the side of his forehead. A drop of sweat rolled down the right side of Buck's head and over a swollen vein. I should have thrown you in jail years ago when I caught you with all of that pot. Shh, Buck. You talk too much. If you'd arrested me then, my daddy wouldn't have been able to make sure you got your promotion. Buck reached across the table and snatched the yellow legal pad off the edge. One day, Randy Jr., I'm going to shove my fist right down that smart-ass mouth of yours. Oh, Buck, that's your answer for everything, isn't it? The large detective with the dark-haired box cut turned towards the gray steel door. The corner of the legal pad gave into Buck's angry grip. Oh, Buck, you forgot my coffee. There's no need to kill any more styrofoam trees. Right, Buck? Buck's shoulders collapsed inward in time with the clenching of his left fist and the crumpling paper in his right hand. He whirled back around towards Randall, slamming both hands and the legal pad on the gunmetal table. God damn it, you little fuck, I wanted to kick your ass since the 11th grade. A door slammed on the other side of the mirror. Well then, Buck, it looks like now's a good time. It's just you and me alone and Buck. A tall man in a white and button-down shirt with navy blue slacks and razor-sharp pleats called out as he entered the small room. Did you hear me, Detective Buford Schuler? Yeah, if I had a name like Buford, I'd want folks to call me Buck, too. Mr. Hollifield, we're trying our best to treat you with some respect. You could show us the same courtesy. Buck still held the corners of the table hostage and left his eyes locked on Randall. Randall lifted the right corner of his mouth in a daring, challenging small smile. Kirby, this pathetic excuse for a human being's confess to killing two people is right here on this notebook. Buck waved the crumpled legal pad at the air. And now he wants me to get him a cup of coffee like I'm his damn nigger. We don't use that language on my shift. Do you hear me, Detective Schuler? Buck stood up and stepped backwards from the table while Kirby plucked the pad out of Buck's brown, meaty hand. Oh, yeah, Buck, we're all politically correct around here. Ain't that right, Kirby? Kirby was reading Randall's written confession. I'll call you Mr. Hollifield. You can refer to me as Detective Logan. How's that? Kirby never even looked up at Randall. Randall leaned over to the right so he could look at Buck. Now this guy scares me. Detective Logan has that kind of quiet confidence that he never showed back when we were in Boy Scouts. I remember him crying when we got lost on that camping trip to Fall Creek Falls. Detective Logan cried like a little baby. That's enough, Mr. Hollifield. Please shut up or you'll be shitting your teeth in my watch too by tomorrow evening. He maintained his focus on the legal pad while speaking to Randall. Buck chuckled at Kirby's open threat. Why are you still here, Detective Schuler? Please get Mr. Hollifield a coffee in a new styrofoam cup. Cream? Sugar? Both? Kirby's head swiveled around as he pointed the corner of the legal pad in Randall's face. Kirby dressed his face with what could be considered a half smile. Or a sneer. Hey, is nigger flavored an option? Yes, Randall. It is. Buck stepped towards the table and looked around at Kirby. So one hot cup of black coffee for our esteemed guest. Kirby shot Buck a quick sideways glare as he moved around the table and lifted the chair from underneath. The latch clicked in the door at the same moment Kirby's ass landed on the seat. Okay, we're alone. Why did you kill them? Randall's head bounced along with his breathy chuckle. Well, everything that I have to say is on that legal pad. She was having an affair, and I got angry. End of story. And all that you ask from us is a chance to visit your father's grave, and either you can't read, or you're just trying my rather short fuse. I'd like the opportunity to make my peace with the colonel before I show you where they're buried and spend the rest of my natural life as a ward of the state of Tennessee. Randall leaned both elbows on the table and folded his fingers together. I have to talk to the colonel. I'm not visiting him. And if I choose not to grant your request? Well, I think my statement fills in any gaps in your limited imagination. Kirby folded his arms over his chest and leaned back in his chair, smiling. The two men sat in silence, looking at each other. Neither of the men looked towards the door when Buck walked back into the room with Randall's steaming cup of coffee. Another quarter of a minute passed before Kirby spoke. The colonel may not have raised you to be physically strong, but you've always been a strong-willed man. 4 chair legs scraped across the floor as the lanky detective pushed himself away from the table and stood up. Randall, I don't think there's going to be a problem with your request. We're going to check out the site, make sure that we're not walking into a trap, and it should be a go for tomorrow afternoon. Randall's hands were still folded while he turned his head towards Kirby and Buck. Thanks, Kirby. I appreciate it. There's no tricks. Just trying to tie up some loose ends for the colonel. Buck, allow Mr. Hollifield to drink his coffee while you're reading him his rights. Then handcuff him. Process him. Put him in a solitary cell with an officer on 24-hour watch until tomorrow. Yeah, I'll book him. Coils of steam rose from the snow-white cup in Buck's hand. Buck, if there's so much as a scratch on Mr. Hollifield, I'm going to hold you personally responsible. I will prosecute you, and I will send you to a maximum security cell block with some really horny, muscle-bound skinheads that have a hankering for some dark meat. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, I understand you. Buck's dough-brown eyes battled with Randall's. That's good. I'll see you tomorrow, Randall. Buck, I'll see you once Randall's been processed and placed in a cell. Kirby left the two men alone with the low hum of the central air unit to serenade them. You have the right to remain silent. You understand that, Massa Hollifield? Randall nodded. Oh, I do. Buck took a quick glance at the still steaming coffee in his right hand and hacked some fluid into his mouth. He stared at Randall while the green-whitish slime parted his lips and plopped into the steaming styrofoam cup. Anything that you say or do can or may be used against you in a court of law. Do you understand that, Mr. Hollifield? He smiled at the end of the sentence and with a gentle nod handed the cup down to Randall. Their fingers met for a small part of a second when Randall took the cup. Randall's hands never stopped moving as the edge of the white styrofoam cup met his lips. Buck could see the glob of his spittle move closer to Randall's lips and then slide inside his mouth and out of sight. The cup was half empty and not as steamy when Randall placed it on the table. Yes, Detective Schuler, I understand. The sky over Foote County, Tennessee on the morning of July 7th was dark with clouds and angry with lightning. The officers gathered in front of the exit from the jail and kept back the unexpectedly large crowd of journalists. Randall shook the tethered bracelets on his legs and wrists and peered over his shoulder at the crowd beyond the window and the thick brick wall that was hunched beneath umbrellas and rain parkas. Wow, gee, all this for little old me? Buck grabbed Randall's shoulder and roughed him around in the seat. Face forward, prisoner. Randall held both of his hands chest high and waved his index fingers back and forth. Tis, tis, Bluto. Did you not hear Kirby? Not a scratch, and I'm sure that meant not a bruise as well. Randall placed his hands on his knees and continued loud enough for everyone in the transfer room to hear. Hey, don't tell me that the steroids withered your northernmost head as well. Buck leaned down close to Randall's left ear. Shut your fucking mouth, you shrimpy little punk. That's all you've ever been. Wishing you could be a real hero, a real American like the Colonel. Randall stood up and pointed at the window. All those news trucks and satellite dishes from all the big networks, they ain't here to see your sorry ass. They're here because your father saved 20 American lives in the dead heat of battle. They're here because instead of running away from a firefight, he ran towards the bullets and bombs. Randall leaned his head back against the wall and rolled his eyes back beneath his eyelids. And then you come along to sully the name that he wore with pride. So you just exercise your rights to shut the fuck up until you're asked to speak. Fuck you, Buck. Hey, wow, that sort of has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Buck leaped at Randall and pinned him to the wall. "Nah, to kill you, you fucking faggot." 3 officers grabbed Buck and pulled him away, while another shoved Randall down onto the bench that he was chained to. "Randy, I'd kill you if it weren't for Kirby threatening me last night. I tell you what, when we get back in the cemetery, we got our 2 bodies, you and me gonna have a nice long little talk." Randall's head came off the light gray cinder block wall, with blue eyes glaring at Kirby as he stepped into view. "Nice speech, Detective Sheila. But you're not being paid to preach to my prisoners. You don't think Randall's right about that juice fucking up your brain?" The other officers smiled and ducked their heads into their chests so as not to infuriate Buck anymore. "All right, everyone. We'll be transporting this prisoner, Randall G. Hollifield, Jr., today. First, we'll travel in an armed caravan of vehicles to the West Forge Cemetery. All officers will create a manned and armed 50-foot perimeter around the headstone of Lieutenant Colonel Randall G. Hollifield. I will escort the prisoner to the face of the headstone. I'll leave him there for a total of 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, or if the prisoner finishes his conversation early, he will tell us the location of the bodies of Mrs. Kaylin Rayburn Hollifield and Neil Edward Hayes are located. Is that correct, Mr. Hollifield?" "Nope, Detective Logan, that is not correct." "Well then, Mr. Hollifield, what part of your stipulated plans is incorrect?" The self-convicted murderer leaned his elbows onto his thighs and cradled his chin in his hands. "Why, Mr. Detective Man, you didn't read the confession completely. I want to enjoy my last day of pseudo-freedom. I want to breathe the air of a man with no verdicts on their ledger." "Mr. Hollifield, you're mistaken. I read and studied each and every word that you wrote, and you wrote nothing about being unshackled." "Oh, Detective Logan, handcuffs and leg irons don't confine me. Well, you could put me in a full body cage and my mind would still be free. But see, I wasn't even referring to being physically unshackled. I was referring to being able to visit the site where my adulterous wife and her dahlia are buried. You see, I want to show you, personally." A flash of lightning caused the lights in the transfer room to flicker, and an immediate boom of thunder played harmony to the silence in the room. "That will be fine. I'll escort you personally. I don't want any messages to be misconstrued." Kirby nodded at Buck. "Let's get him out of here and let's get the show on the road." There was a deputy on each side as Buck checked Randall again, and then the throng of people stepped out of the small building and into the rain. Camera flashes exploded when Randall and Buck walked out. Questions rained from reporters hoping to get an answer and prop up their chances to earn a desk job and leave the bad weather and travel assignments for another hard-luck correspondent. The slender man adorned in the orange jumpsuit and Foote County jewelry smiled at the attention. "Well, well, well, seems like I'm a very popular man today."
Mr. Hollifield, is it true that you killed your wife and lover?"
"Where are the bodies, Mr. Hollifield?"
"Did you kill your father and sister, too?"
That last question stopped Randall's feet in a puddle that covered the entire sole of his right foot. "Come on, Randall. Let's keep moving to the car." Buck squeezed the prisoner's elbow and walked him through the puddle and on towards the silver and blue Foote County police cruiser. During the 20-minute drive to the West Forge Memorial Gardens and Cemetery, Randall, Buck, and the uniformed Foote County Sheriff deputy rode in silence. As if cued, when the first vehicle on the motorcade turned into the cemetery, the sun parted the dark clouds and danced through the tapering rain that lingered. By the time all of the cars had parked at the foot of the hill near the middle of the property, the clouds gave up their fight and allowed a bright blue sky to break through. The raindrops that made the final leg of their trip to the surface created a rainbow that from the main gate arced over the hill where the bodies of Lieutenant Colonel Randall Grant Hollifield and Jolene Olivia Hollifield lay. The gates of the cemetery were closed to the public and to the press corps. To eliminate enterprising journalists from running a helicopter and filming from the air, Foote County was able to institute a no-fly area for 1/2 mile around West Forge. Buck was the first out of the car, and he stepped back to the passenger rear door and opened it.
All right, Randall, let's do this.
The prisoner was in the back seat with his head in his hands.
Randall, it's time.
Buck reached into the vehicle and touched the orange-clad prisoner on the shoulder. Oh, so now it's a touch of compassion for the tortured soul?
Is everything okay, Detective Schuler?
The young deputy was probably a few years out of high school. The few hairs on his face weren't in need of frequent attention, and Buck smiled at the young officer's enthusiasm.
Hey, Rook, chill your jets. I'm just trying to show some understanding for my fellow man. Besides, he ain't going nowhere. If he wants to try suicide by cop, hell, I sure as hell accommodate him.
Randall lifted his head and stuck his right hand out of the door. No, I'm good. I'm just a little dizzy from my lack of sleep last night. Buck grabbed a handful of orange fabric and pulled Randall out of the car.
Oh, looks like our little murderer is getting a little bit of sympathy sickness.
Randall barely got his legs out of the car and under his torso while Buck roughed the prisoner out of the back seat.
Sympathy sickness? What's that?
The rookie held the car door open while questioning the detective.
They still don't teach y'all nothing at the academy, do they?
Buck shook his head at the rhetorical question.
Sympathy sickness is a condition where that scumbag criminal realizes they're going to face a jury of their peers, and after the jury spends taxpayer dollars eating a few good meals, they vote to ship our criminal up to Riverbend or some other state facility where the taxpayers just keep on feeding and housing the convicted until they die, or until we get a chance to exact our revenge for the dead.
Buck talked and checked the shackles on Randall before spinning him towards the steps and shooting a thumbs-up sign to Kirby's car.
Do you understand now, rookie?
It was difficult to tell if Buck was holding the fabric of the orange jumpsuit or if his hand was grabbing the back of Randall's neck. But what was easy for all to see was that the prisoner was uncomfortable.
There's no reason to hold Mr. Hollifield that tightly. He may be in the custody of the Foote County Jail, but he's still a human being.
You remember that, Detective Schuler?
Yes, sir, Detective Logan. I didn't realize that you were so concerned about all of God's children.
Logan stepped between Buck and Randall and wrapped the long fingers of his right hand around Randall's slim bicep. Yes, sir, I am. He looked up the hill at the tall rosewood headstone.
Detective Schuler, place the officers around the base of this hill with about 15 yards between each officer.
He paused for a few seconds and looked at the side of Randall's head. If the prisoner so much as moves away from the front of that headstone without raising his right hand as a signal that he's ready to leave, tell the officers to fill him with more holes than Swiss cheese. If they miss or he's trying to escape, there are 2 snipers out there with orders to shoot to kill. Do I make myself clear, Detective Schuler? Buck walked in front of Randall and leaned down to smile.
Crystal.
Randall stood at the top of that hill talking to a headstone for about 13 minutes. He stood alone in the bright sunlight before he lifted his right hand and his face into the sky. Kirby and Buck stepped towards the prisoner that faced them from the top of the hill.
Where do you think you're going, Schuler? I'm going up to get the prisoner. Although it'd be fun to watch him walk down those steps with the leg chains on, I'm sure you wouldn't want to see him fall with the eyes of that whole nation watching the Foote County Sheriff's Department.
Kirby's shoulder pushed Buck aside when he walked towards the steps leading up the hill. What you're going to do is tell the other deputies that they're going to follow me and Mr. Hollifield wherever he's decided those bodies are stashed. The tall detective turned back and smiled over his shoulder at Buck. You've always been my junior. 4 years younger, 4 years behind. I was a member of this force for 6 years before you. You know what? Randall's right. You wouldn't have become a detective if it hadn't been for Colonel Hollifield putting his nose into county business. Your daddy was nothing but a flunky for the colonel, and it sickens me that I have to put up with your simple ass every day. Buck chewed on his bottom lips.
One day, Kirby. All hell, one day.
Well, it isn't today, and tomorrow isn't looking too good either. Mr. Hollifield specifically asked for me when he turned himself in. He told me that I was one of the only people that ever had his back in this shithole of a town. I'm the one that collared him, and now I'm going to locate the bodies. Assistant Chief Deputy Logan. That really has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Boy. Kirby walked to the top of the hill and faced Randall. Some people swear that Randall had a smile on his face. Some think that it was a frown. The two shook hands and then turned to walk down the hill. Randall was counting out the steps during his slow walk towards either life in prison or lethal injection. When Randall reached the number 10, Kirby could clearly be heard telling Randall, "Shut up." Randall's knees buckled when he reached number 16. Kirby gave Randall's right arm a firm tug while he asked him to shut the fuck up. Everyone could hear Randall call out,
17.
The detective pushed Randall's arm, forcing the prisoner to face Kirby. Randall's lips said something that was difficult to understand. But one thing was certain, the firm, businesslike smirk left Kirby's face when Randall pulled him in, nice and close. That was the last anyone saw of Kirby, or Randall for that matter. The crater in the side of Hollifield Hill is still there. Both of the Foote County natives were obliterated by the explosion. An old man walking his dog found Detective Kirby Logan's badge lodged in the bark of a tree a month or so after the incident. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's bomb boys didn't take long to determine that somehow Randall was carrying C4 explosives on his person. They think that he carried the C4 outside of his body, while a few argued he may have ingested it in a bag and then regurgitated a fuse of some type. Me, I don't know. It was a madhouse around here for a couple days. I was questioned. Then I took a lie detector test and passed. And then I was questioned even more. What they could find of Detective Kirby Pankow Logan was placed in a shoebox and then placed in a casket with an American flag and then lowered into a hole about 200 yards from the hole that was created when Kirby lost his life. Some of the folks around town have already started calling that giant hole Kirby's Crater. Late on the evening of July 7th, I drove to my simple home. That ain't much, but hell, on a deputy sheriff's salary, I get by. I'm not married, but maybe one day I'll find the right girl and settle down. It's a quiet life here on the edge of Foote County. Just me and my dog. I flip on the lights and draw the shades before falling into my favorite chair. The faux mahogany coffee table's barren except for a legal-sized manila envelope that reads, Buford T. Schuler, 473 Hollifield Road, Foote County, Tennessee. I don't want to open the envelope again, but the colonel's voice is bouncing around inside my head, demanding that I finish what I started. I shake the contents onto the coffee table. 2 Ziploc bags, each containing a sealed white envelope and a folded sheet of paper tumble out. I'd spent the 4th and 5th of July going through the instructions and trying to wrap my brain around everything that was happening. Like a good soldier, I pulled the folded paper towards me for one final read. May 23rd, 2014. Buck, I hope that this letter finds you in good shape. I'm sorry that I haven't been in contact with you over the past few years. I wanted to say hello to you at the colonel's funeral, but I didn't think that you were ready. Please read the rest of this letter. It's very important that you do. The colonel and Jolene would have wanted you to. I have a few important things to tell you. Buck, I'm going to need your help. Please read what I have to write, and then make a decision about what you want to do. First things first, I'm dying. I've been diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor that's cancerous. How about that for a 2-barrel motherfucker? Not only do I have a knot inside my skull that's half the size of a baseball, but the goddamn motherfucker's cancerous. The good doctors at Fisk University Hospital have given me 3 or 4 months to live. According to them, the last month's going to really suck.
I guess that we're not going to have another chance to go hunting. Or maybe we will. I'm going to move on to my second topic. By the time that you come home from work, there'll be a box on your front porch. Inside, you'll find Jolene's diary. I found it when I was cleaning her bedroom out a few months ago. All that I can say is, I didn't know. How can two guys be such good friends and one of them not know that the other's having a relationship with his sister? I knew that you had a crush on her, but I never mentioned it because you would have beaten me up. I didn't know that she liked you too. I mean, you were her type, big, strong, and smart. I read some of the poems that you wrote to her. A 2-year age gap is huge when you're a teenager. Of course, nobody was going to mess with you. You were the biggest and baddest guy in town, and you were only a teenager. But I was proud to call you my friend, and I still am. If you were worried about the Colonel liking you, I mean, the man's been dead since March, and I still can't bring myself to call him Dad. Well, I just want you to know that he knew about the two of you. Call it father's intuition. He and Jolene discussed you a few weeks before she died. According to her diary, she wasn't going to talk to him about it, but he cornered her on the topic, and she confessed. The Colonel loved you like a son. Heck, you were a son to him. He promised your daddy that he'd take care of you, and he blamed himself for your daddy dying. We'd see your daddy going off into town, and the Colonel would get really quiet. When he did talk about your daddy, he'd tell me that I could save Isaac from gunfire and bombs, but I can't save him from himself. When your daddy passed away, I'm sure that you blamed yourself. The Colonel told me that a man comes back from war looking at things with different eyes. Seeing all that death and blood can make some people a little crazy. The best thing that happened to the Colonel was my mama leaving us while I was a baby. He woke up out of his stupor with a 2-year-old daughter and a newborn son. Maybe that's why we were such good friends. Our daddies were childhood friends. They fought for our country together in Vietnam, and their wives both left them when it was all too much to bear. May 24th, 2014. Sorry, I had to take a small break from writing. It doesn't take a lot for me to get tired. Pushing this pen's like pushing a giant rock uphill, and I also need to sleep on what I'm going to write next. Jolene's diary was full of secrets. I almost didn't open it. I didn't think that it was my place to pry into her private life. She started keeping her diary when she received it as a Christmas present in 1984. The Colonel brought it back to her from one of his trips to Washington, D.C. She didn't write in it every day, but by the time she was 14, she'd made a stop to write once or twice a week. Sometime between February 13th, 1988, and February 17th, 1988, she was practicing signing her name, Jolene Olivia Schuler. It was Memorial Day, 1991, when you kissed her for the first time. Well, when she kissed you for the first time. I could hear her laughing as she described the 14-year-old boy that didn't know how to kiss. You meant everything to her. She was every boy's dream, smart, beautiful, athletic. Oh, the things that she could have done if she'd lived. I'm sure that you two would have made beautiful nieces and nephews for me. The Colonel would have died a happier man. A part of him died on August 19th, 1992, when he found her body in the woods behind our house. He begged me to find out who killed her and get justice for him and her. I don't know how the police missed it. Maybe it was the respect that everyone paid to the Colonel. They were in such awe of him that they had overlooked clues. Maybe they thought that if the news got out that Jolene was involved with a black man, the Colonel's good name would be sullied. Maybe it was privately discussed that she got what she deserved. Or maybe, and this is what I think, they're just a bunch of backwoods cops that didn't know an investigation from a hole in the wall.
Jolene mentioned it first on July 4th, 1992. You had to work on the 4th of July and didn't go to the fireworks with her. Kirby cornered her and propositioned her. When she refused, he threatened her, called her all kinds of names. Her last entry, and I mean her very last entry, was on August 17th. I don't want to tell Buck because I know that Buck will drive over to Kirby's house and beat the shit out of that scrawny little Peckerwood. Kirby's really starting to scare me. He keeps showing up wherever I am. This afternoon, he pulled up next to me at the Golden Gallon and formed his finger in a V in front of his mouth and wiggled his nasty tongue between his fingers. Ew, gross. While I was pumping gas into my car, he told me that he was going to either kill me or Buck if I didn't hook up with him. I reminded him of the time that he got scared on that Boy Scout trip and cried and peed his pants. Daddy still laughs about that. Anyway, I'm scared of him. It's the way that he looks at me. He used to be really dorky, but now he's just really creepy. You know in your heart that Kirby killed my sister. You had the one thing that Logan's money couldn't buy, and that's Jolene's love. I have little time left to live, and very little to live for. I'm going to kill Kirby for taking Jolene out of our lives. I can do this a number of ways, but I'd like your help to give him what he really deserves. I've given this quite a bit of thought, and I have an idea on how it can be done. And maybe I can kill 3 birds with 1 stone. Buck, I've missed your company, and I hope that we can catch up. I wrote this letter by hand, and I hand-delivered it to your home. I'm not going to leave any trails of any kind that could connect you with me. If we meet, it needs to be discreet. I recently found out that my wife, Kaylin, and some guy that she works with are having an affair. I hired a detective from Nashville to follow her around. I'm not exactly surprised. Hell, nor do I care. She married me to be as close to the Hollifield name and what she thought was our riches. Now, we were comfortable folks, and she knew that. But we weren't rich by any means. The Colonel had some rental properties, and the family had some land. He made a little money letting folks hunt on our land, and a whole lot more giving speeches about his heroics in Vietnam. Kaylin wasn't in love with me. It only took a year before she started sleeping in another bedroom. I have no clue when she started sleeping with other men. But I have a plan that will solve all of my problems. But I need some help. I need your help. I know that you're off next Friday and Saturday. I'm thinking about taking a day trip to Chattanooga and catching some sights. There's a little pub in Eastridge named Pork Chops. There aren't any cameras there, and we can talk without leaving any trails. I'll probably bring enough cash so I don't have to use my credit card anywhere. I'll be at Pork Chops by 6 p.m. I hope to hear from you soon. And even if you can't help me, it'll be good to see you again. Your old friend, Randall. Buck took the letter to the kitchen and dropped the letter in a large open saucepan. He found the lighter fluid under the sink along with a box of candle matches. While the ruined saucepan cooled in the sink, Buck pulled a navy blue book off the top of the living room shelf. The worn journal bore the initials J.O.H. in gold print on the spine. May 27th, 1991. He kissed me. Well, I kissed him. If I'd have waited for him, we'd both be old and still sitting on that bench watching fireworks. I think that I'm in love with Buford Schuler. Jolene Olivia Schuler. I love the way that looks.